Marcus had been away for so long that the streets of his hometown felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. The trees were taller, the sidewalks had more cracks, and the neighborhood children were different faces than the ones he remembered. But the air smelled the same, warm with a trace of cut grass and faint barbecue smoke that lingered in the evenings. It smelled like home. 8 years. That's how long he had been gone. 8 years of special forces deployments, of deserts that swallowed the sun and mountains where the cold could cut bone. 8 years of nights where silence was broken only by gunfire or whispers over a radio. He had walked through places where most people would never dare step, carrying not only heavy gear but the heavy weight of responsibility. He had seen good men fall, and he had walked away more times than he wanted to remember. Coming home wasn't just a choice. It was survival. His soul needed it. When Marcus first saw the subdivision his mother had recommended, he thought it looked too perfect. Rows of houses painted in polite colors, lawns so carefully trimmed they seemed like plastic, driveways lined with SUVs and minivans. It looked safe, manufactured safety, the kind built by rules and enforced by committees. He didn't care about that. He wasn't looking for a dream home. He just wanted a place quiet enough for him to breathe without scanning rooftops for snipers. He picked a modest house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It wasn't fancy, but it had a front porch and a backyard big enough for his dog once he got one. Inside it was empty except for a couch, a bed, and boxes he hadn't yet opened. He didn't need much. Peace wasn't measured by furniture. It was measured by silence. Still, even on his first night, he noticed the little signs of control. Bright yellow flyers tucked into his mailbox. Homeowners Association meeting, mandatory. Approved paint colors. Trash bins must not be visible from the street. He had chuckled at first. After years of survival in foreign lands, the idea of someone policing trash cans seemed ridiculous, but he brushed it off. He wasn't here to argue about paint, colors, or mailbox heights. He was here to heal. The truth was, Marcus was tired, not just in his muscles but in his bones. He carried his service quietly. He didn't tell the neighbors who he was or what he had done. He didn't wear his medals or parade his past. He was the kind of man who could sit at a table full of strangers, and no one would guess the storms he had walked through. He preferred it that way. His mother used to tell him, "Son, peace is something you have to make for yourself." That was what he wanted, peace. But peace has a way of being fragile. It was during his first week that he noticed a man circling the block, in a white pickup truck. The man wore a navy shirt with security in bold letters across the back. His chest carried a shiny badge that looked real at a distance but plastic up close. A pistol rested at his hip like it belonged there, but the way his fingers twitched near it told Marcus otherwise. This wasn't a soldier. This was someone playing a part. The neighbors called him Doug. HOA security, they said, but Marcus didn't need long to understand the truth. Doug wasn't security. Doug was a man hungry for power, the kind who puffed out his chest when no real authority was around, the kind who smiled wide when people looked nervous and doubled down when they didn't. Marcus had met men like him overseas, men who wore uniforms not because they wanted to serve but because they wanted to control, men who mistook fear for respect, men who didn't know what real danger looked like but carried weapons anyway. And while Marcus wanted peace, he also knew this. Peace was always threatened by men like Doug. Doug was hard to miss. Every evening around sunset, his white pickup rolled slowly through the neighborhood like a shark circling water it didn't own. He leaned out the window with dark sunglasses, even when the light was fading, pretending he was on some kind of official patrol. The truck had magnetic decals on the sides, neighborhood safety in bold letters, and a flashing orange light strapped to the roof that never actually worked. But it wasn't the truck that made people nervous. It was the gun on his hip. Most neighbors ignored him. Some even waved, more out of fear than friendliness. A few families whispered complaints at HOA meetings, but nothing ever changed. Doug wasn't hired by anyone. He wasn't even approved by the HOA board. He had simply declared himself security. He bought the badge online, printed up flyers, and told people he was there to protect them. And because no one wanted confrontation, they let him be. But Marcus wasn't most people. From his porch, Marcus watched Doug one evening as the pickup slowed near his driveway. Doug leaned out the window, eyes scanning Marcus like he was taking measurements. The look wasn't casual. It was sharp, invasive, the kind of look that said, "I'm watching you." Marcus stared back, his face calm, unreadable. Years of training had taught him how to show nothing, no matter what churned inside. But deep down, he felt the warning bell. He had seen this before in villages overseas, the local bully who thought a uniform made him untouchable. The first time they clashed was over something painfully small. Marcus had parked his car in front of his house while unloading groceries. The trunk was open, bags scattered across the driveway. He had just reached for a sack of oranges when the white truck stopped behind him, blocking the road. Doug jumped out, hand resting near his gun, voice booming like a siren. "You can't park there. Against HOA rules." Marcus turned slowly, oranges still in his hand. "It's my house," he said quietly. "I'm just unloading. Won't take more than a few minutes." Doug's jaw tightened. His badge caught the setting sun, glinting like it wanted to be real. "Doesn't matter. Rules are rules. You people always think you can do what you want." Those words stung. You people. It wasn't just about parking anymore. Marcus felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the same one he used to feel when ignorant men underestimated him because of his skin, his quietness, his calm. But instead of snapping back, Marcus simply nodded once. "I'll move it when I'm done." Doug didn't like that. Bullies never did. They fed on fear, not composure. He lingered for a long moment, glaring, waiting for Marcus to flinch. But Marcus just carried the groceries inside, one bag at a time, never breaking his calm stare. Finally, Doug spat on the ground and drove off. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. Over the next week, Doug circled more often. He parked across from Marcus's house at odd hours, sitting in his truck with the headlights off. Neighbors noticed, but no one said anything. A few whispered to Marcus when they saw him at the mailbox. "He's like that with everyone," one woman said nervously. "Best to just ignore him." Another man sighed, shaking his head. "He's harmless, just power-hungry." But Marcus knew better. He knew how dangerous a man with insecurity and a weapon could become. Overseas, he had seen villagers terrorized by men with rusty rifles and too much ego. It wasn't the weapon that made them dangerous. It was the hunger for power behind it. One night, Marcus sat on his porch, sipping water after a jog. The street was quiet, moonlight pooling over the cul-de-sac. That's when Doug's truck appeared again, crawling, past slower than usual. This time, Doug stopped in front of Marcus's house. He leaned out the window, smirked, and tapped the gun on his hip. No words, just a gesture. Marcus didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply met Doug's eyes with a calmness that felt heavier than anger. He had faced down men with bombs strapped to their chests. He had looked into the eyes of trained killers. Doug was none of those things. Doug was dangerous, yes, but not in the way he thought. Marcus knew then. Peace wasn't going to come easy, not here, not with Doug circling like a storm on the horizon. It was a Saturday evening when the first real confrontation happened. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with gold and purple. Marcus had just returned from visiting his mother. He parked, his car outside his house, the trunk full of groceries and supplies. The neighborhood was quiet, children riding bikes, a few neighbors watering their lawns, dogs barking faintly in the distance. Marcus was tired but content. Carrying 2 heavy bags in each hand, he walked from the trunk toward his front door. That was when he heard the familiar sound of a truck engine slowing down. His shoulders stiffened even before he turned his head. Doug's white pickup rolled up, stopping right behind Marcus's car. The orange light on top of the truck flickered weakly, like a dying candle. Doug stepped out, sunglasses on even though the sun was almost gone. His boots scraped the pavement, heavy and deliberate. His hand hovered close to the pistol on his belt, like he wanted everyone to remember it was there. "You can't leave. Your car like that," Doug barked, voice sharp enough to cut the evening stillness. Marcus set the bags on the ground, straightened up, and faced him. "I'm unloading groceries," he said calmly. "It'll take me 5 minutes." Doug smirked, tilting his head. "Doesn't matter. Rules are rules. Cars aren't supposed to be left on the curb. You people always think the rules don't apply." The words hit harder than they should have. You people. Marcus had heard that phrase his whole life. It was never about rules. It was about skin, about presence, about being seen as an outsider in a place he had every right to call home. For a moment, old memories stirred. Walking home from school as a teenager, stopped by men who demanded to know why he was in his own neighborhood. Patrols overseas where villagers were treated as less than human. He thought he had left that behind. But here it was again, in his own driveway. Marcus breathed slowly, keeping his voice even. "I live here. My name's on the deed. I've earned the right to park in front of my own house while I carry my food inside." Doug's smirk faded into a scowl. He shifted his weight, hand brushing the gun at his side like a nervous tick. He wasn't used to people answering him calmly. He was used to fear. He was used to neighbors nodding, apologizing, and hurrying away just to avoid his temper. But Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He stood there, tall and steady, eyes locked on Doug's. The air thickened. A couple of neighbors glanced out from their porches, sensing the tension but staying quiet. The street fell into that uneasy silence, the kind that comes right before a storm. Marcus bent down, picked up the grocery bags again, and walked toward his door. "Like I said," he repeated softly, 5 minutes. Doug's jaw tightened. His pride burned. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to prove he was in charge. But Marcus gave him nothing. No fear, no anger, just calm certainty. And that calmness was louder than any insult. Doug spat on the pavement, muttered something under his breath, and climbed back into his truck. The engine roared as he peeled away, tires screeching down the cul-de-sac. Marcus stood in his doorway for a moment, bags heavy in his hands, watching the taillights disappear. His chest ached, not from fear but from frustration. He had come home looking for peace. Instead, he had found another battlefield, smaller, pettier, but no less dangerous. He set the bags down inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. His heart was steady, but his mind was restless. He knew Doug wasn't done. Men like him never stopped after one warning. They came back again and again, pushing harder each time until someone broke. Marcus wasn't afraid. But he wasn't blind either. He knew exactly what Doug was. A man with insecurity wrapped in a fake badge carrying a real gun. And that combination was more dangerous than anything Marcus had seen in uniform. For now, he told himself, he would let it go. He would hold on to the calm. He wanted peace more than anything, but deep down Marcus already knew this was only the beginning. It was a cool night, the kind Marcus usually loved. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The neighborhood was quiet. Most families inside, lights glowing through curtains. Marcus laced his sneakers, pulled his hoodie over his head, and stepped outside for a jog. Running always cleared his mind. Let him breathe. Let him push away the ghosts that sometimes followed him from overseas. The streets were empty, as his footsteps tapped a steady rhythm on the pavement. His breath came slow and controlled, his body moving with practiced ease. For the first time in days, he felt almost at peace, until headlights exploded behind him. A truck engine roared, tires screeching as a vehicle swerved hard to block his path. Marcus skidded to a stop, heart rate spiking, but not from fear. He knew the sound. He knew the weight of a vehicle moving with purpose. The white pickup. Doug. The driver's door flew open, and there he was, storming out like a man in a war. He invented himself. His sunglasses were gone, but his chest puffed out the same way. And this time his hand wasn't just hovering near the gun, it was already gripping it. "Freeze!" Doug shouted, pointing the weapon straight at Marcus's chest. His voice shook, but his finger rested dangerously close to the trigger. "You don't belong here, you're trespassing." Marcus didn't move. His breathing slowed. Years of training clicked into place like gears in a machine. He measured the distance, 7 feet. The angle of the barrel, center mass. Doug's stance, wide, unstable, amateur. His eyes, nervous, twitching, fueled by fear more than control. This wasn't the battlefield, but Marcus's instincts treated it like one. Every detail sharpened, every sound became clear. The hum of a streetlight, the faint rustle of leaves, the click of Doug's finger against cold steel. Slowly, Marcus raised his hands, palms open. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice meant to lower the temperature of a room. "Put the gun away, Doug. You don't want to do this." Doug laughed, though the sound cracked halfway. "Don't tell me what to do. I'm security. I'm keeping this place safe." Safe. Marcus almost wanted to laugh at the word. Here he was, a man who had crossed deserts, rescued hostages, and dismantled bombs. And now he stood in his own neighborhood, unarmed on the outside, with a fake cop pointing a loaded gun at his chest. Inside his hoodie, Marcus was not helpless. He carried, with him, the tools of a soldier, always discreet, always ready. But more than weapons, he carried something Doug could never touch. Control. "Doug," Marcus said again, softer this time, like speaking to a child. "You're not trained for this. You're shaking. That weapon is dangerous in your hands. Put it down before someone gets hurt." Doug's face twisted, caught between fear and pride. His finger twitched on the trigger. "Don't try to act smart. I know what I'm doing. People like you." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He knew that phrase. He had heard it earlier. He had heard it too many times in his life. People like you. Doug wasn't seeing a neighbor. He wasn't seeing a homeowner. He was seeing a target, a threat, because Marcus was black, because Marcus carried himself with quiet strength, because Marcus didn't bow. That realization hurt more than the gun itself. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. Marcus saw everything, the slight shift in Doug's stance, the shallow panic in his breathing, the way the muzzle trembled ever so slightly. Doug didn't have control. The gun had control over him. Marcus's special forces training screamed in his head. He could disarm Doug in less than 2 seconds. One step, one twist, one strike, and it would be over. He could break his wrist, snap the weapon free, and leave Doug on the ground begging. His body itched to move, but Marcus also knew this wasn't a battlefield. This was his neighborhood, his home, his peace on the line. If he escalated too soon, if one wrong move happened, it wouldn't just be Doug who lost. Marcus's life could change forever in the eyes of the law, no matter who was right. So he stayed still, hands up, voice calm, though his heart hammered, steady like a war drum. "Think about your family, Doug. Think about your neighbors. You point that gun at me and you're not protecting anyone. You're putting everyone in danger." The words hung heavy in the night air. For a moment, just a moment, Doug's eyes flickered with doubt. His grip loosened slightly, like he wasn't sure if he was the hero in this story anymore. Marcus seized that flicker, not with violence but with presence. He stood taller, steady as stone, refusing to give Doug the fear he craved. The street was silent. The world held its breath. Marcus knew it then. This wasn't over. This was just the spark. And sparks always found something to burn. The night felt heavy, like the air itself had gone still. Doug's hands shook around the pistol, his finger dancing too close to the trigger. The streetlight above flickered once, then glowed steady, casting long shadows over both men. Marcus stood calm, hands raised, his hoodie dark against the pale glow. From the outside, he looked like just another man caught in a dangerous misunderstanding. But inside, his mind was a machine, calculating distance, angles, time. He didn't just see Doug with a gun. He saw the weakness in his stance, the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight leaned too far forward. Marcus had spent years studying men like this. Men who thought a weapon made them powerful. Men who didn't understand how fragile control really was. "Doug," Marcus said again, his voice deep, steady. "This isn't the way. Put the gun down." But Doug's pride was louder than reason. His lip curled, and his words spat like venom. "Don't talk to me like that, I'm in charge here! People like you need to learn respect." That phrase again. Marcus's chest tightened, but his face stayed still. He thought of his mother, of all the times she warned him about the world seeing him as a threat before they saw him as a man. He thought of the soldiers he had served with, men who had trusted him with their lives because they knew what he was capable of. And here he was, in his own neighborhood, treated like a criminal for jogging in the dark. Doug's hand twitched. The gun jerked, just slightly, but enough. Marcus moved. To the neighbors who peeked from behind curtains, it looked like a blur, a flash of motion too fast to follow. In less than a heartbeat, Marcus closed the distance. His hand clamped Doug's wrist, twisting hard, forcing the barrel away from his chest. Doug yelped, stumbling as Marcus's other hand pressed against his shoulder, guiding him down with controlled precision. The gun was gone. It clattered against the pavement, kicked out of reach before Doug even realized he had lost it. Now Doug lay flat on the ground, face pressed to the asphalt. Marcus kneeling beside him with calm strength. He didn't strike. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than violence. Doug struggled, his voice cracking. You attacked me. You can't do this. I'm security." Marcus leaned close, his words low, steady, sharp as a blade. "I've disarmed men twice as dangerous as you, men who knew what they were doing. You are not one of them. You don't scare me, Doug. Not tonight. Not ever." The words hit like cold steel. Doug froze, the fight draining out of him. For the first time, he saw Marcus not as a jogger in a hoodie, not as a man to intimidate, but as something far more dangerous. Calm power, controlled and unshakable. Marcus stood, pulling Doug up with one hand, then shoving him back toward his truck. He picked up the pistol, unloaded it in seconds with fluid motions born of muscle memory, and set the empty weapon on the hood. Neighbors were outside now. Lights glowed from porches, voices whispered sharp with shock. People had seen. They had heard Dauerner. Marcus turned, his voice rising just enough to carry across the street. He pointed a loaded gun at me for jogging in my own neighborhood. The words were heavy, undeniable. They cut through the night air, like a truth too sharp to ignore. "Yo," crowd murmured. Some gasped. Others stared at Doug with wide eyes, realizing what kind of man they had let roam their streets unchecked. The fake badge, the fake authority, the real gun. And now, the reality, that it could have ended in blood if not for Marcus's calm. Doug's face burned red. He sputtered, looking around for support, but no one stepped forward. The neighbors weren't with him anymore. Marcus let the silence linger, then said softly, more to himself than anyone else, "This was never about safety. This was about power." For the first time, the truth was visible. Not just to Marcus, who had known it all along, but to everyone watching. Doug wasn't protecting anyone. He was the danger all along. And Marcus? For the first time, his quiet strength was revealed. Not fully, not the details of his service, not the scars or the missions, but enough. Enough for people to understand he wasn't a man to be underestimated. The mask had fallen. The truth was out. The street was alive with whispers now. Lights flickered on in every house as neighbors poured out, some still in pajamas, some clutching phones, all with wide eyes. The calm, orderly neighborhood had transformed into a scene that none of them expected. They stopped a few steps away, unsure whether to approach or keep their distance. Marcus stood tall in the middle of the street, the pale glow from streetlights casting long shadows across his face. His hoodie was damp with sweat, his hands steady, at his sides. He hadn't moved unnecessarily. He hadn't shouted or acted violently. He had done what was necessary, and in doing so, had revealed the truth. Doug, still on the ground, sputtered, flailing slightly, but no one came to his side. For once, the man who had claimed authority, who had threatened with a pistol and a badge, found himself alone and exposed. His fake security, his illusions of power, crumbled in the face of Marcus's quiet, unwavering presence. A woman stepped forward, clutching her robe around her. "Is he okay?" she asked, glancing nervously at Marcus. "He's fine," Marcus said calmly, eyes briefly flicking to Doug before returning to the street. "The problem isn't him, it's the choices he made. He pointed a gun at me for jogging in my own neighborhood." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some shook their heads, in disbelief. Others crossed their arms, exchanging looks that said, "We should have known." A few younger neighbors whispered, staring at Marcus with wide eyes, unsure whether to admire him or fear him. An older man, who had been watering his lawn, stepped closer. You didn't hurt him?" he asked, voice trembling. Marcus shook his head. "No, violence isn't always the answer. Control, composure, and presence, those are stronger than a gun. That's what keeps people safe." That's what he didn't understand. Some neighbors whispered quietly among themselves. They had seen Doug patrol for months, showing off his authority, scaring kids, harassing homeowners, yet no one had ever done anything. Now, in the span of a few seconds, the truth had been exposed. Their quiet street, their safe little world, was suddenly illuminated by reality. Another neighbor, a teenage boy holding his dog on a leash, spoke up. He just took the gun from him? Like that?" His voice shook with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Marcus nodded once. "I've trained for situations like this. I know what's real danger and what's false authority. He thought he could intimidate me. He was wrong." For a moment, silence returned, heavy and reflective. Neighbors looked at each other, some ashamed, some relieved. They had allowed a man with fake authority to threaten everyone in the street. But they also saw someone who had calmly, without panic or cruelty, shown the truth. Someone who protected them without seeking praise. A few parents began ushering their children indoors, while others lingered, watching, learning, understanding that safety wasn't about signs, cameras, or flashing lights. It was about presence, awareness, and courage, the kind Marcus carried naturally. Doug, still on the ground, tried to rise, but his legs wobbled. He glared at Marcus, shame and fear, twisting together on his face. You'll regret this," he spat. But no one listened. His words had no weight anymore. A neighbor, middle-aged and tired, finally said aloud what everyone was thinking. "We've been letting him scare us for months, for no reason." The street echoed with agreement. Heads nodded, murmurs confirming the truth. Marcus stepped back, giving Doug room but maintaining control of the scene. He looked around at the neighbors. "Remember this," he said quietly but firmly. "Fear is easy to give away. Don't hand it to anyone. Stay calm. Stay aware. That's how we protect ourselves. Not with badges, not with weapons, but with presence and integrity." For the first time, the neighborhood felt alive in a new way. Not just safe because of rules, but safe because of awareness, truth, and courage. Marcus had not just disarmed a fake cop, he had woken the neighborhood up. And in that quiet glow of streetlights and realization, something shifted. People started to see clearly. Authority is meaningless without wisdom, and true strength is silent, calm, and controlled. Doug lay on the ground, defeated, humiliated, exposed. Marcus walked back toward his house, shoulders relaxed but alert. He had shown the truth, and for the first time in years, he felt a small measure of the peace he had been chasing. The street, once passive, now understood something vital. Peace wasn't about rules or fear. Peace was about courage, and it had a face now. By the time the police arrived, the tension on the street had already shifted. Doug sat on the curb, arms wrapped around his knees, his fake badge lying in the grass beside him. The neighbors watched silently, some still wide-eyed, others shaking their heads in disbelief. No one stepped forward to defend him. He had lost that privilege the moment Marcus had stood his ground. Officers approached cautiously, taking in the scene. They saw Doug's shaking hands, the discarded pistol, and the man who had remained calm the entire time. Marcus. Questions came quickly, voices clipped. Professional. But Marcus didn't panic. He explained simply, clearly, what had happened. Doug had pointed a gun at him without cause, threatened him for being in his own neighborhood, and acted outside any authority. He actually had. The officers listened, nodding, their expressions confirming what the neighbors already knew. Doug sputtered and tried to spin the story, but the truth was plain for all to see. Witnesses spoke up one by one. The neighbors had seen the tension, the threat, and Marcus's composure. Their statements confirmed his account. Doug's authority crumbled completely. As Doug was led away, Marcus finally exhaled. The weight he had carried, the tension, the anger, the memories of a world that often saw him as a threat, began to lift. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. But there was a quiet relief in knowing the danger was gone. And more importantly, that he had protected not only himself but everyone around him without losing control. The neighbors lingered. Some whispered quietly to each other. Others approached. Marcus hesitantly. A few, the ones who had watched from their windows, finally spoke. "I didn't know," one woman murmured. "I didn't know someone could stay so calm and so strong." Marcus shook his head softly. "Strength isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It's quiet. It's control. You protect yourself not with fear, but with awareness and calm." That's what Doug didn't understand. A few parents called their children over, holding their hands, showing them a lesson they would not forget. The street felt different now, somehow heavier, but safer. The air itself seemed to breathe easier, no longer carrying the threat of a man who had wanted to rule with intimidation. Marcus walked back to his house slowly. His heart still raced, not from fear but from the intensity of the night. He thought about his years in special forces, about the missions where life and death balanced on a single decision. He thought about the families overseas who had relied on him to stay calm, to protect them, to act with precision and care. And now, in his own quiet neighborhood, he had done the same. For the first time since returning home, he felt a small sense of peace settle in his chest. It wasn't complete. The memories, the scars, the long years of survival, they were still there. But he had earned a moment of clarity, a moment where he could stand in his own street and know he was safe, that he had done the right thing, and that justice, quiet, slow, inevitable justice, had been served. Neighbors waved, some smiled, others simply nodded in respect. None of them needed to know his full story, his military background, or the skills he had honed over years of hardship. They only needed to see what they had seen: a man who refused to be intimidated, who stayed calm in the face of danger, and who protected his community without ever losing himself. Doug would face the consequences of his actions, legal charges, lost reputation, and the knowledge that he had been exposed for what he truly was. The HOA would have to rethink its policies, its security, and the neighborhood itself would be forever changed. But Marcus, he had claimed something far more important than victory over a fake cop. He had reclaimed his right to peace, to presence, and to live without fear. As he stepped inside his home, shutting the door gently behind him, Marcus allowed himself a quiet smile. For the first time in years, he felt truly home. The street outside was still, the neighbors safe, and the night no longer carried the weight of fear. He hung up his hoodie, sat on the couch, and exhaled slowly. This was his neighborhood now. This was his life now. And for once, it felt like it really belonged to him. Peace, he realized, wasn't given. It was earned. And tonight, Marcus had earned it.